So I want to begin with talking about the first series that I saw, which was the Hollywood Boulevard series, which Gus did a show of in 2019 at Vita Schnabel. And so, Gus, I wanted to see if you can talk a bit about how your living on or near Hollywood Boulevard kind of influenced the series.
Yeah, I think a film like My Own Private Idaho really started when I was living right on Grace Avenue near Hollywood Boulevard, and it was in the 70s and early 80s, and it was a moment in time when all the theaters were still operating. They all had movies running. It was just sort of the last moment when that happened, and there was post office that you would use, and there was a library that you would go to. It was like a real little community, and it was also like peopled by a lot of desperate and disparate characters who seemed sometimes like they had been, the popular kids at school, and maybe, or like the good-looking kids at school that were told if they get to Hollywood they could be a movie star. So they're sort of on the street. I mean, it's still the same today. I mean, there's an influx of people that are here because of their chance to kind of be on the screen. The screens are changing, but it was a little bit about that. It was a particular watercolor that I made with early watercolors at the time, that with these giant characters. They weren't particularly well endowed. They were like sort of hulking, overweight giants who were kind of existing on the streets of watercolor drawn and painted Hollywood Boulevard and the cross streets, Highland, and the buildings that were in the city were like from memory, pieces that I was doing from memory, and slowly the figures became less blobby and more like figures of models that we had in art school that we would draw and paint from life in art school. And they started doing that, and then they started to resemble the kind of searching characters that were on Hollywood Boulevard, and particularly in front of the Chinese Theater, and even down even near Hollywood and Vine.
Yeah. So you're talking about these characters that kind of get stuck in limbo. They're coming, perhaps trying to be a movie star or something, and they might end up performing as Spider-Man or Batman outside the Chinese Theater to get money. But there are these kind of characters that become a little bit fragile in their grading, which also the Idaho kids have that kind of ambiance too. And I was wondering, what do you think draws you to a kind of mad or fragile character?
I probably felt that way myself. I was just one of them.
Yeah.
I was one of the people on the streets. I was trying to exist on bad food that I'd found on Hollywood Boulevard.
Yeah.
I was surrounded by those characters. I wasn't close to any of them, but was sort of at a distance. They were interesting characters.
Okay. And then you just spoke about the figures kind of becoming blobby, and then more similar to a nude you would paint in school. And we've talked about before your early kind of foray into painting and art when you were in middle school. And I wanted you to talk about a bit Richard Levine, your teacher, and what you took from him.
Yeah, Robert Levine.
Levine, sorry.
He was this amazing art teacher that when I was 11, I started going to a middle school in Connecticut that was a good school, and he was a very out gay teacher in early 60s. So it was like an interesting like moment in time to be very flamboyant and out and proud of his sexuality. And he was teaching us all kinds of things, like to make mobiles like Calder, silk screens, not like Warhol, it was before Warhol was silk screening, I think, but silk screening because that was a method that he had experienced in his own art. And he was doing a lot of paintings in acrylics and with polymer and like using sometimes gold leaf, and it was kind of like amazing. And he would paint in class, we would paint as well, and he had a following of sort of dedicated young artists, which I was one of, and we would just be doing stuff for him. Sometimes we'd be doing like projects that were for the school or for local businesses, like silk screening posters and things. And he was like why I was starting to paint. And simultaneously we had another teacher, which I didn't have until I was 14. And he was an English teacher, but he was showing films in English class, which was interesting. We were reading books like Lord of the Flies and Waiting for Godot at 14, and we were watching films like Citizen Kane. And it just was kind of this great juxtaposition. And he was also using experimental cinema as well, artists, mostly from Canada, because the prints that he could get were mostly from the Canadian Film Board and not the US. I don't think had a support system for that kind of thing. So we were watching artists that had made films by block printing on the film, or painting on film, or animating directly onto film, and making soundtracks that were experimental. So he was also super influential.
Yeah. And something that was interesting to me was when you mentioned that Levine was using gold leaf. That's something that came into your practice later when you were making the Mona Lisas. So you would sometimes paint them or pencil crayon or something, and then there's a few that are used with gold leaf. And I kind of thought it was a more, academic kind of concept, but I think a lot of your work kind of goes back, your painting work goes back to these early days where you were influenced by your teachers and your peers, and learning about the Village Voice and kind of these, New York institutions.
Yeah, the gold leaf was directly from Levine.
Yeah.
Because he was using gold leaf in his paintings, which was kind of like magical.
Yeah.
And it was also, if you got a hold of it, it was super hard it would just fly away in the air, and it was super hard to control.
Yeah.
And interesting.
I'm gonna make it a little louder for you. Oh, sorry.
Louder?
Okay, good.
And you said the Warhol screen printing was came a little bit later. Later in the time.
Excuse me. I think it's too loud. Yeah. I can go closer. Or is this better?
It's
No.
very loud. Let's see. Okay, good. See the opposite.
Testing.
That's like next to
Yeah, it was like the gold leaf was very sort of hard to control, and I think it was also something you'd find in the art store where in my small Connecticut town, because people were using it to, decorate lamps and things like that. But Levine was using it to paint with.
Yeah. And then so you using silkscreen in some of your more recent works, what is that influenced by the Warhol look and kind of how he was in your kind of language later when you were painting in your early?
Really not until I think I first heard about Andy Warhol when I was 16, because he was on the cover of Life magazine. So he had really gone through his whole, sort of became a very important painter, an artist. By it was probably 1968, and by then he'd almost like peaked and like. But I had to ask my classmates who this guy was, because he was surrounded by Joe D'Alessandro and the actresses in his films, and they had like Andy tattooed on their arm. There's one particular superstar that had Andy tattooed on their arm, and I had no idea who it was.
Yeah.
So it started there, and I think I was I don't know if I was influenced directly at that moment. I remember by the time I got to art school, just two or 3 years later, or maybe it was a little longer, my classmates were the Talking Heads, and they were playing Psycho Killer at our school dance, like the first time they played. But they also played like some Velvet Underground songs, and I thought it was cliche because we were artists and we were listening to like an art band that would be in New York. Although they did a great job.
Yeah.
They hit it big.
But so, like, do you think it was in your subconscious later when you were doing these silk screens, that kind of Warholian look of repetition, and you kind of use a single frame over and over in such that it looks a little bit like a...
Yeah, I think we were doing, like, that happens when you're making a silk screen, you print it and you put it out to dry, so all of a sudden you have the same image, like, times 25 or something, and so you do see that just in the normal just way of printing. But I'm sure I was, through the years just influenced by the lore and the films.
Yeah.
I think I was especially influenced, sort of like I knew about the films.
Yeah. And one of the recurring images in some of your silkscreen works is, I found out through talking to you, a young Montgomery Clift. And I wanted to know why you're drawn to him.
Montgomery Clift. I think I thought it was a really cool picture, and then I learned, oh, this is Montgomery Clift at 14 in Woolworths in Arkansas, or it was from the South, and just was so long ago when you think of Montgomery Clift as a chiseled, like Hollywood, sort of Bogart character.
Mm-hmm.
Just was something that was.
And you think like his life and how his like arc as an actor played out interested you cinematically?
Yeah, no, he was a very, very strong actor. I always felt like the best.
Mm-hmm.
Like better, as good. I'm sure Brando looked up to him.
Yeah.
But he was also like even more than somebody like Brando. I think he was very tortured.
Yeah. That makes sense. And then a stylistic jump in your breadth of work is these huge resin paintings, the one on aluminum. And you've mentioned that they're kind of image style quotes from newspapers or other sources that you found. How did you come up with that style?
There was a moment in time where I was working in Nashville, and Harmony Korine had created an entire studio out of a building. He bought a building, 8-story building, and he was painting in the building. And I was there working on this project for about a week, and he said, "You should come and make a painting." He had all these paints and canvases, and he had assistants, and so he wanted me to make a painting. Little did I know he would keep the painting. But which made sense. But it was good. It would turn out to be a good painting. But there was a paint store I went to get paint. Instead of he was using oil sticks.
Okay.
Oil sticks. So it was a little something I didn't really know and wasn't sure about. But I went to the paint store to see if there was something, and there was a paint called I think One Stop or One. I'm forgetting it. It's a very high gloss and really, really dangerous, like fumes come from it. So you can paint with it, but you really have to. If you have to be outside, but also with like a ton of fans
Yeah.
blowing, or else you're gonna get sick.
Yeah.
So I was in a studio and not really aware that working with this was going to be that toxic. I just thought, oh, I'll have a little bit of a hangover, but it really kind of ruined what I was doing. I was shooting a commercial with Stevie Wonder in it,
You felt
and I was
sick.
like really sick during the shoot because of this paint. But it was, yeah, I liked it because it was so shiny, and I was started to work on metal because it seemed like a surface that would really should bring the paint out.
Yeah. And then so when you came back, did you just start fabricating these big kind of aluminum, because they're mounted on wood and they're like really big, heavy objects? You just kind of
Yeah.
thought, I want to keep running
But
with this?
they're not so heavy because the aluminum is really light.
They're relatively heavy.
Well, you've been
Yeah, I
lifting
lifted
them. Okay, they're big too.
They're big,
so
yeah.
they're unwieldy, but they yeah.
Yeah.
They were the size of the panels that you could buy, so
Yeah.
they ended up to be like 93 inches high or
And then you
something.
just screwed them in.
Yeah, and you could like attach them to the wood.
Yeah. And so the ones in the book are all in this speech bubble kind of shape. And so back to the subject of the speech bubbles, they were newspaper, they were like,
They were
Images.
sort of images of war and images of sort of different types of hardship that
yeah.
were from magazines, and you know, the bubble was meant to be like a quote, like a speech bubble. It's like quoted from a magazine.
Yeah. And then just that little mention of subject, a big series recently for you was the Mona Lisa series, which are pixelated in various forms and various mediums. And there's this anecdote that we just talked about. Because a big question, I think, when sharing your work, people are like, why is he painting the Mona Lisa? And so can you explain a bit this subject of the Mona Lisa and how it came to be?
Yeah, I think that really it sort of was a question of like painting what I was painting, like what was connecting with me, and what the subject, quote unquote subject, was that I was painting. And I was trying to find something that had like less of a subject by using maybe one of the more kind of well-known images in the world, and that somehow the the familiarity of people with that image would erase like the subject, the idea of having a subject, because it came from another subject, a different subject. That was part of it.
That was part of it. And you've done so many of them, like throughout scale and medium. Did you have any like certain discoveries about which kind of like how they differed between medium and kind of scale? Like, did you feel a different way about them?
The different Mona Lisas?
Yeah, and just like the size and style.
Well, I think that one in particular, the repetition, I started to like find that they were interesting, like when they were repeated. And Warhol had made a Mona Lisa repetition painting, which I thought was a good painting, but I just kept going. I don't know. I kept like making them a series. I don't know why exactly.
But
it was hard.
Like within them as well is like you have ones that are, you know, super sharp pixelations, and then they kind of move into these images that are so abstract that you can barely tell, especially if you're close to them. You really have to be far away.
Yeah, for most of them, you have to be, in order for the image to register,
Yeah.
you have to be pretty far away.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you can use your phone and look through your phone and it appears.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were pixelated. They were the colors were divided up into large squares, but they would make the Mona Lisa kind of magically when you're stepping away from it.
Yeah. And something that kind of runs through your thematics, within painting? Is this, you have the celebrity of the Mona Lisa, or you have someone like Montgomery Clift who's like embedded in cinema, and in some of the press that you were doing about this book, people repeatedly ask, how do you think of filmmaking compared to your painting practice? Can you elaborate a bit on how you think about those different mediums?
I feel, I mean, for me, I think there's just two different things. Like, because the paintings are so much about, like, I think one solid image that has a border and has, you know, relationships within the border, and film is more amorphous and moving around, and less about the still image. Unless there are filmmakers like Wes Anderson who's really using the proscenium of the theater to focus in, but for me it was always different, you know, painting and filmmaking.
Yeah, I guess I think like the technicalities of both are so different, like you're saying, but kind of through you as an artist, you do kind of understand that this is part of your world. And your first museum show ever was a co-show with James Franco, who was showing recuts of My Own Private Idaho, and you had these watercolor paintings of boys. Do you want to explain a bit about that show?
Yeah, so that was really sort of where I got back into paintings, because I had early, or while I was going to school in the 70s, I was a painter, but I started to work in film, and the kids in the film department were critical of all the other departments because it was so hard to make films that they said you have to eat, sleep, and dream film only. You can't paint at the same time. So I sort of gave painting like a backseat space, and I started to like just try and focus. And it was true. It was really very hard to do to make the films we were doing, and I kept going. You know, I followed that. I came here to LA to work in the film world, and you know, made low budget films at first that caught some attention, and they got bigger and bigger, and then, you know, like decades were going by, and Franco wanted to. He was in Milk. He was Sean Penn's boyfriend in Milk, and the organization in Portland, Oregon, wanted to get one of the actors up to appear for a fundraiser, and I knew that Sean was like maybe busy, and it's possible that he would maybe not be able to do it. So I asked James, and I knew I could get James to come up because I had all of the rushes, all the unused film from My Own Private Idaho just in my possession, and I had a flatbed editing machine. I could show it to him, and I said, if you come up here, I'll show you all the rushes of My Own Private Idaho, which I knew he loved, you know, like it was a really important film for him.
Yeah.
And Sue said, absolutely. So he came up, we watched it, you know, for about 6 hours. I showed him a bunch of the outtakes, and he said, I want to have all this on video. And I said, okay, well, that'll cost, you know, like $100,000 to do it. He said, I'll get Gucci to do it, because he was a Gucci model at the time, or a Gucci personality?
Ambassador or something.
Ambassador.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, we'll get Gucci to pay for it. So we actually transferred it, and I was getting deeper and deeper into this sort of trouble, and so we have all the film on video, which was useful if you ever wanted to watch it.
Yeah.
And it's the same as the film. It's just all the takes that were not used.
Yeah.
And he said, "Can I make my own version of it?" And I was like, "Oh God." Yeah, sure. But like, don't show it anywhere. And he goes, "Okay, no, I'm just gonna make my own version." So he made his own version, and he was like, "Hey, can I show it at an art gallery?" And I said, "Which one?" And he said, "Gagosian." I was like, oh, that's pretty good. He goes, and he was going to be hosting the Oscars as a host. And so the Gagosian Gallery planned to let him have a space in the gallery, like half the space of the gallery. And he had edited his own version, which was called My Own Private River. It's a different title. And there was also simultaneously running like excerpts from the rest of the film. And while we were planning it, or while he was planning it, I was sort of involved in some of the meetings. Candy Coleman, who worked at Gagosian at the time, she said, well, what are we going to sell? We need something, like, can we get something for the walls? And I thought, oh, this is my cue. As a painter, like I can have paintings in the Gagosian gallery. So I said, I'm going to try and paint some things. And she said, great.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, off to the races.
So you painted those boys, and when I first saw them, and I think some other people too, I was like, they kind of look like the same cast as My Own Private Idaho kids, you know what I mean? These kind of like gorgeous rough and tumble characters, but they're not actually of the same lineage. They were models in the mid-2000s.
Yeah, it would be 2012.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were two models, Luke Worrell and Ash Stymus, who were kind of like street casting models. They were more skateboarders that were. I think Eddie Simon had used Ash in a cover photo shoot for Vogue for one of the fashion magazines, and that was his origins. Luke, I can't remember how it worked with him, but there was three models who were kind of like off the typical model grid.
Yeah.
And they were the subjects of the paintings. I had to find a subject.
Yeah, exactly.
The term subject came up, and I was like sort of racking my brain. What can I paint? And I did really love the photography of those guys, and I was like, maybe I should paint those.
Yeah.
And I did, and it took months and months to do it. I wasn't even sure that it was any good, and so it went well, and the show went well, and they sold some of the paintings. And during the show was simultaneously Ed Ruscha had a show in the other half of the gallery. And I had met Ed like once or twice. I didn't know him very well, but he wandered over to our side while we were sort of installing it, and he looked at my watercolors and he said, "What's the subject?" And I was like, "Subject?" He's like, "Well, these are models for fashion magazines." And I didn't know whether that was the right way to answer the question. But I kept thinking, because he was so like direct in his question, the idea of subject became big in my mind whenever I was working on something. So for the next series was the Hollywood Boulevard paintings.
Yeah, and then it kind of turned into you pondering the subject of the Mona Lisa and using it as a non-subject in the end.
Supposedly a non a
Yeah.
large subject that was sort of canceling itself out.
Yeah. I think we can open up the floor if there's anyone that wants to ask any questions.
Hello. I was wondering if there's any chance you'll ever release Alice in Hollywood,
Yeah, Alice.
or tell us about it too. Yeah.
Alice in Hollywood was the first feature that I made in the 70s, and it was sort of like a kind of retelling of Alice in Wonderland in Hollywood, and it didn't get into any festivals. It wasn't like a film that like was well received, and I cut it down so that it wasn't, sort of something people needed to endure, like that it was shorter. So that didn't help it in any getting into festivals at 45 minutes. And yeah, I don't think that it won't necessarily. It might be on some kind of DVD or something.
Bonus feature.
Bonus feature, yeah. But it exists. There are prints of it.
All right.
Anyone?
Yeah, you mentioned that you had an art teacher at 11 and then an English teacher at 14. Had you not had these teachers, do you think that you would be who you are today?
That's a good question. Probably not. No, I'm pretty sure the painting teacher, without his kind of like intensity, and kind of, he was very like driven to like get us to paint stuff, like to paint things. It could be almost anything, and also he wanted to make sure that we cleaned up the watercolor set after it was all messed up. Neatness was important to him. He was like, when he silk screened, he had a suit on, and he would tuck his tie into his pocket so it didn't go down into this ink when he was pulling the screen. And like, he impressed us with, like, wearing a suit, he could silk screen posters. And without all that, and other students following him, probably wouldn't have painted necessarily. And the film side of it, yeah, without David Sohn was his name, possibly wouldn't have been as absorbed by cinema.
One of my absolute favorite films of yours is Jerry. And one of the reasons why I watched it recently at the Cinematheque and you were there is that it's almost resistive to narrative and interpretation. And I'm just curious whether you find that sort of refuge in your painting work as opposed to your film work.
Yeah, I think there's some connection in that subjects area of like painting the Mona Lisa that's like trying for the viewer, that Jerry was like, wasn't really planned to be as austere as it is. There was a series of things that happened in the making of Jerry, which I don't know how many people have seen the movie Jerry here. But we were intending to make a kind of like improvised film, and my two actors were Matt Damon and Casey Affleck, that had known each other as kids and grew up together. And they were very chatty and funny, went just on their own. So I wanted them to be just like that in the desert because they were so entertaining. And I thought of it as a John Cassavetes type of project that would be in the desert. And it was Matt that knew the story of the two characters that get lost in the desert, because they were from Boston and he had read this story about them. And so we thought, okay, we'll go in the desert, we'll get lost, and you guys will like try and, talk your way out of it and out of being lost. And one will die, and the other one will kill the other one, which is what happened. And there was a mystery, like why did one guy kill the other guy? And I thought we would like look for the mystery by reenacting it, because nobody knew really why one killed the other. And there were two guys that really got very lost in not an open desert. It was sort of a basin, so they couldn't find their way back out. Which we didn't know when we made the movie. We just thought they got lost in an open desert. And we're always really close to the road, which was safety. And the basin allowed them to always be close to the road. In our case, they just always made the wrong turn, not towards the road, but they remained close to the road. And as we started working on it, the happy-go-lucky two friends that are joking all the time were self-conscious, and they didn't want to look like fools on the screen. so they started to not improvise in the same way that like they were when we were writing it. And so as we proceeded, I started using other examples instead of John Cassavetes. I started to get the idea that we could keep the story and keep moving forward without them feeling like they were acting like fools, I should try to just talk them into acting like fools, but instead of doing that, I just allowed them to be more silent, and that the dialogue that they had was, you know, sort of nothing. It was something that the audience didn't need to understand. It was only between the two characters. It wasn't for you to like interpret as an as a viewer. And we made it, and and Matt was like, so that's it? It's gonna be this austere? And I said, yeah, that's the thing.
One more?
It's okay, I don't even like.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of your Polaroid work, and I know the existence of the 108 Polaroid photographs. Would you ever consider making that widely available for the public? I know it's a very limited edition book. And also, if you still are shooting Polaroids, or you're still taking Polaroids yourself.
Yeah, like I bought the camera, the Polaroid camera, when I lived off of Hollywood Boulevard. And there was this camera shop that had a chopped 1960s Polaroid, meaning they had, in the 60s, the Polaroid film was like a big roll. It was kind of this very odd contraption that the camera was very heavy because of the way that it used the film, which was kind of large. And they had invented like the pack film, which was like a flat pack of 8 shots. And I bought this camera before I was making films, really, and it was $350, which was, at the time, was a lot. And I didn't really know why I bought it, but I was taken with it. I was a photographer, but it's not like I took it and started shooting all these. I was using my regular camera for normal shooting. And when we were making films, it became really useful to remember people by it, because there was no internet to kind of look up people's, Instagram to get a picture of their face. You had to take a picture when you met them in a meeting, or else you just wouldn't have a picture. And the film also had a negative with it. They made one of the styles of film that had a negative that was connected to it. So when you took the Polaroid apart and washed the paper off, you could blow up the negative. It was quite a dense, beautiful negative. And so I kept the collection. When I started doing Drugstore Cowboy, I was shooting all the actors that came in, and I just filed the collection away with the idea that I could have a show later, which I eventually did in Portland. And during that same period, I made the book that was 108 portraits. I was offered the other, month to make another book of Polaroid. So that's sort of a possibility. The film itself no longer really, it's rare, it costs a lot, and it's 20 years old, so you might spend $100 on a pack that when you break it apart, it just doesn't work. It's just all dried out. And I just got offered a job in Paris, where I'm going next week, to shoot, and they are insisting that I shoot with Polaroid, so I'm going to find out what that's like now. But the camera was always really beautiful, and the images were really kind of arresting. And yeah, the book is, I think they probably still have copies. It's just maybe expensive.
Yeah.
And they probably have one in this store too.
I think it's a good time for us to start signing the book.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.